everybody. It's Jeff from Ayelet Tours, and since 1986, we've been connecting people to Israel and the Jewish world. We are the official travel partner for Hadassah Missions to Israel. We run trips all over the world under the banner of the Traveling University, featuring outstanding scholars, including Professor Stephen Berk. We run best day adventures for Jewish adults and Jewish singles. We, of course, do virtual programs. And this evening, we are honored to once again be joined by Professor Stephen Berk, who will be speaking with us about the ShUM cities. Now, what are the ShUM cities? You're here, you're going to find out. It just so happens that it's an appropriate topic for us to talk about because we will be running a river cruise featuring Professor Berk next June 15th through 22nd. This is a Rhine River cruise that will visit the ShUM cities, leaving from Dusseldorf, going to Cologne, and ending eventually in Basel, Switzerland. So it's very exciting. This is a private yacht. We own the ship for that week. So really looking forward to it. It should be very, really incredible experience, high-level luxury ship, the opportunity to learn not just from Professor Berk, but also from Dr. David Mendelsohn, who will be along for the journey as well, and share in all of this learning and touring and experiencing together with an amazing group of people. Find out what you can tonight, and then check it all out on our website, ayelet.com. As a reminder for people, this is the fourth in our four-part Scholar-Palooza series. If you missed number 1, 2, or 3, they were excellent. We had Mark Epstein talking about Italy. We had Yael Strom and Elizabeth Schwartz last week speaking about Greece, and in the middle, Dr. David Mendelsohn shared about Uzbekistan. All of those are on our YouTube channel. So if you missed them, you want to go back, you want to watch them, share them with others, just go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ayelet Tours, and you can find them and watch them there. This one as well will eventually end up there, which is to say it's a recorded program. So that's usually by the end of the week we get those posted up there. In addition to it being recorded, if you're here with us, September 30th, 2025, beautiful Tuesday evening, we would love for you to participate. How can you participate? Well, it's a webinar. There is a function called the Q&A, and you can post whatever questions you have. And after Professor Berk gets through his formal presentation, we will gladly take as many questions as we can. Of course, we're talking about the ShUM cities, but Professor Berk, there's so much going on in the world today, from the potential of maybe a breakthrough in the Middle East, who knows, to, my gosh, there's so much. If folks have questions beyond just the scope of this evening's presentation, I know you're always game for all sorts of questions, so people can keep that in mind. All right, with no further ado, we'll talk a little bit more about trips and all sorts of things that we can do after Professor Berk, but I do want to get to this evening's presentation on Germany and the ShUM cities specifically. And so, Professor Berk, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you all for tuning in. A happy and healthy New Year to all of you. For those who are fasting, I hope that you have a meaningful fast. We're going to have a good time on this cruise. And we're going to go to see a place, some cities that really could be argued to be the center of Ashkenazic life in the Jewish diaspora. For those of you that came with me to Eastern Europe, I say we go to the Jewish heartland when we go to Poland. And we sometimes go to Lithuania as well, and we've been to Ukraine and so on. That too is a heartland. But in terms of a spiritual heartland, in the medieval period, there was no place like the ShUM cities. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit, not sometime, I'll talk to you about the ShUM cities. Then I'll talk to you about the other cities that we are going to see, like Dusseldorf, Cologne, Strasbourg, and Basel. And then we're going to go into, and a little bit, very little bit here, but on the cruise, I will talk to you about German history in the modern period as well. So I'll give you a hint of what I'm going to talk about tonight. Again, thank you very much for tuning in. What do we mean by the ShUM cities? There are 3 of them: Speyer, Worms, and Mainz. These are all along the Rhine. They're in the western part of Germany, and they are very, very interesting and very old cities. Here, if you can get a close-up, Jeffrey, you can, that would be good too. You can see this is where it is. And for a long period of time, for several hundred years, this was where, from here, came out ordinances, decrees that affected Ashkenazic Jewry in some ways down to the present time. I'm talking about the 11th century to about the early part of the 15th century. Now, it's a long time ago, and it's going to be superseded by things happening in Poland and Lithuania and in other parts of Europe. But once again, forgive me for repeating myself, it's in those cities, Speyer, Worms, and Mainz, that rabbis, great rabbis, are going to say things. They're going to put ordinances, the decrees, they'll be binding upon some Jews right down to the present time. So let me give you an example. I assume if we're all law-abiding citizens that we have one wife. The men have one wives. That was not true for a long period of time until in the 11th century. It is a rabbi from, again, the ShUM cities, Rabbi Gershom, the light of the diaspora, that established an ordinance that continues right down to the present day. Polygamy is out. It's one wife, and that's all there is to be. That's all it is to be. This is one of the greatest rabbis in modern history, in all of Jewish history. And again, from this small area in the Rhine, along the Rhine, this is going to be a decree that is binding upon all of us right down again to the present. The great biblical commentator, Rashi. Now, Rashi was from France, Troyes is in France, but he will spend a good deal of time studying and writing in Worms. So if you went to Hebrew school, certainly to yeshiva or day school, we all read Rashi, we all read his commentaries. This is the man that you go to, the first commentator on the Torah. This is the one that you go to, as well as being a great Talmudic commentator as well. So what do I mean? What are the things? The first, of course, is the one that I just mentioned to you. That is, polygamy is out. One wife is all that you can get. It is in the ShUM cities, Takanat ShUM, the ordinances of the rabbis of the ShUM cities, that a number of things come down to us. One is that there can be no divorce unless the woman agrees to the divorce. The days when there was a unilateral declaration of a man that he wanted to be divorced, those days are gone. It's the ShUM cities that protect the woman in that type of situation. In addition to that, there's something else linked to it. A man marries a woman, and in order to get the marriage going, to make sure the marriage took place, the woman's family provides the man and his family with a dowry. And it can be a very large sum of money. If the man dies without having any children, Takanat ShUM says that the dowry goes back to the woman's family. That's important. It's a protection of women. Because according to Jewish law, women at that period of time did not inherit. It would go to the husband's family, and the woman would be left high and dry. Now, again, according to Takanat ShUM, the ordinance of ShUM, the money, again, if the man dies childless, the dowry that the woman's family had provided now goes back to the woman's family, and she can now really receive some substance. That's important. And then the issue of chalitza. Now, that's a very interesting thing. Again, biblical law says that if a woman is married to a man and the man dies, the man's brother, if he is unmarried, maybe if he's married in a time of polygamy, he is to marry the widow. And that presents all sorts of problems. Takanat ShUM, the rabbis in ShUM, declared that the other option, chalitza, that is where the woman takes off the shoe, spits on the ground. It really looks ugly, but in a sense, it is more protective of the woman than the other one, more protective of the man as well. He's not forced into a marriage. And so from ShUM goes out the decree that in situations like this, it's chalitza. That's really the route or the route that should be pursued. Then something else. A synagogue, you buy a piece of land and you have a synagogue, you cannot really exclude people. You cannot say that this person cannot come into the synagogue. A synagogue that's purchased by communal money should be open to virtually everyone. So these are the ideas, these are the ordinances that come out of the ShUM cities. Once again, for the third time, these are cities that every Jewish student of history should be familiar with. Speyer, Worms, and of course, Mainz. And again, it is in these cities that yeshivot will be created, and from those yeshivot will come some of the greatest rabbis. Rabbi Tom, the grandson of Rashi, is going to spend time here. And it's Rabbi Tom who says, very interestingly, again, I don't want to put a bias on here because it's a loaded issue in Israel at the present time. Rabbi Tom says it is a mitzvah to work at something besides, again, studying Torah and Talmud. I want to be careful here. I don't want to offend anyone here. Remember, Rashi was a vineyard. These people, these great rabbis, they worked. And Rabbi Tom, a wealthy man, Rabbi Tom is telling people it's all right to make money. It's all right to work. It's a good thing to support your family. It's a good thing to support the community. And the only way you can do this is by making money. And the only way you can make money is to work. So the rabbis of ShUM are what Rambam, Maimonides, was to Sephardic Jewry. And it is in ShUM that codifications of Jewish law will be made. And for those of you that went with me to Eastern Europe, remember we go to Krakow and we go to the Ramah, the synagogue of the Ramah, Moses Isserles. Isserles is the author of the Mappa. That's the Ashkenazi commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, which is, of course, created by a Sephardic Jew. So what I'm talking to you about is from ShUM to Krakow and beyond, we now have an Ashkenazi commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. So what I'm trying to tell you is, and I hope I've made this clear, we spend a good deal of time, certainly on my trips, and I teach Jewish history, among other things, at Union College. I talk about Eastern Europe, I talk about Warsaw, I talk about Slovakia, I talk about Krakow, I talk about Lublin. These are very, very important places in, let us say, 17th, 18th, 19th century. It's in Eastern Europe, not in the area that I'm talking about, that the Hasidic movement is born. But you also should know, in these small communities, in the ShUM cities of Speyer and Mainz and Worms, that from there goes out all sorts of ordinances that really will influence the people in Eastern Europe and influence, in some cases, American Jewry and Israelis down to the present day. Now, the experience, the life experience of the ShUM cities is very interesting. And it tells us a lot about Jewish life. I must also tell you before I forget, and that is, not only do the rabbis in the ShUM cities talk about, give you all these ordinances, they're very much conscious of the fact that they're living among Gentiles and that they are a small minority. They are highly visible because of the way they dress and the things that they eat and so on. They don't want to offend the Gentiles. That's one of the reasons why Rabbi Gershom eliminates polygamy. The Christians have eliminated polygamy. And the Jews would look like, in their eyes, and Christianized, to be barbarians if they continued to practice polygamy. So there are some other things that they say. You may laugh at them, but some people will say that they have some real value. The rabbis in the ShUM cities talk about the jewelry that men and women should wear. Don't flaunt it. Don't be ostentatious in using your wealth or showing your wealth. And in fact, when you hold a banquet, be very careful of what you serve. And they're not talking about, of course, it's taken for granted that all the food that will be served at a banquet will be kosher food. They don't want conspicuous consumption. They don't want the Gentile population who outnumber them by 30 to 40 to 1 to be offended, to become envious. Now, I wrote a book on the pogroms in Russia in 1881 and 1882. And a basic source that I used was some government representatives went out to the places where the pogroms were taking place and asked people, not Jews, why did you carry out the pogroms? Why don't you like the Jews? Now, the usual stuff came forth. The Jews are Christ killers. The Jews, they cheat us in business. All of this stuff, all of the tropes that you are familiar with. But one of the interesting things was, in a number of towns I found, that these government representatives asking the Gentiles what they thought about Jews, we don't like the way they parade on the Jewish Sabbath. Their men and women are wearing the finest clothes, the finest dresses, they're bedecked with jewelry, and so on. Don't misconstrue what I am saying. This is not a major cause of anti-Semitism. It is not. There are so many other things that go along with it. Again, the religious antipathy towards Jews, the peculiar economic relationship, the Jews are middlemen, and so on, the lending of money at interest. All of these things are more important. But this is a contributing factor. And the people in the rabbis in the ShUM cities are going to be very, very conscious of that. So now we go again to some of the things that the ShUM cities experience, which tell us a good deal about Jewish life in the medieval and the early modern period. To begin with, and some of you who have heard me before and have traveled with me before, say it all begins. It really doesn't all begin. It begins in Egypt, the hostility towards the Jews. But that's for another lecture. That is, the Egyptians have a counter-narrative to our story of the Exodus. It's a counter-narrative. But it is with the emergence of Christianity on the historic scene that we see, again, this idea of the Jews as Christ killers. This is the basic teachings of contempt. That is, Judaism at the time of the appearance of Jesus on the historical scene, the charge by the New Catholic Church is the Jews worship the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. And what's the story in the New Testament that makes that clear? What does Jesus do? He chases the money changers out of the temple. Isaiah had said something like that almost 800 years before. And why are there money changers in the vicinity of the temple? Christian polemics against the Jews don't mention that. There have to be money changers in the vicinity of the temple. And the reason for that is Jews from all over the diaspora are coming to offer sacrifices at the temple. They have to change their money from the diaspora. They want to the local currency in order to buy animals to sacrifice at the temple. That's why there are money changers at the temple. Not that the Jews are always searching for a buck. The second and most important teaching, of course, is that the Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus. And I told my students at Union the other day, if they have 5 minutes, and again, for a Jewish audience, my students are not Jewish in that particular class, but even for Jews, I'm telling you what I tell them. If you really want to understand, or come close to understand, or completely understand how the world turns, one must be familiar with the holy books. One should read the Quran. One, of course, should read the Tanakh, the Torah, and the rest of the Hebrew Bible, and, of course, the New Testament. And it takes 5 minutes to read chapter 27 of the book of Matthew. And there is where it's all laid out. And this is what Jews will confront in some places right down to the present day. And that is, here's the scene. This is the trial of Jesus. There's Pontius Pilate, there's the Jewish audience, and Jesus put on trial. And Pilate asks Jesus a number of questions, and Jesus is speaking as he usually does in riddles. It's hard to understand them. But Pilate says, I don't find anything wrong with this man. And Pilate turns to the Jewish crowd in Jerusalem and says, what do I do with this man? And the answer that the Jewish crowd comes out with is, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate responds, Pilate is the procurator here, the Roman in charge of Jerusalem and Judea. And Pilate says, I see nothing wrong with him. And then in one of the most famous gestures of history, Pilate takes a flask of water and says, I wash my hands of this. And then once again, he turns to the Jewish crowd and says, what do I do with this man? And the answer the crowd says, now it's a more elaborate answer. The Jewish crowd yells out, according to Matthew and according to the Gospel of John, which is almost similar in the discussion. The Jewish crowd yells out, crucify him, may his blood be on us till the end of time. I'm telling you as a historian, there's nothing more important in the history of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism than this. This is where it really begins in Western civilization. And then, of course, the third teaching of contempt, God is so angry at the Jewish people because they have killed Jesus that he abrogates the covenants that were made, and that there is a new chosen people, that is the Christians. They are the new chosen people, and they are the beneficiary of God's benevolence and grace. This is going to affect people all over. When the Roman Empire in the 4th century begins to go Christian, the Jewish life becomes very, very difficult. All over the Middle East and all over Western civilization, including in the Rhineland. It is difficult for Jews, but not impossible. And in fact, in the ShUM cities, the Jews are doing fairly well. The reason for that is they're involved in commerce and trade. In fact, they play a disproportionate role in commerce and trade. And what's going to happen here is they actually, for a number of years, a number of decades, like maybe even a century and a half, they are protected by Roman Catholic bishops. Not everybody buys in to this idea that the Jews are an accursed people. And some Catholic bishops who have temporal rule, they own territory, they see the Jews as economically prosperous, and that the Jews would act as a leavening influence. They would boost the economies of their territory. And of course, the Jews would pay a large amount of the tax base. They consider a large amount of the tax base. So the Jews are protected. And again, Jewish life, 10th, 11th, 12th century, 13th, actually into the end of the 11th, very end of the 11th century. Now, I must also tell you, it's not that I want to make a point to you here. Forgive me, I'm not being condescending here. And that is, it's not always a tale of woe for our people. It really isn't. And proof of that is what happens in the ShUM cities. You can't have great Jewish scholarship if you don't know where your next piece of bread is coming from, or the next attack upon you is coming from. There are people who were in Auschwitz that wrote great works, philosophical works. Not in Auschwitz. It's when they come out of Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, where you don't know if you're going to be alive from minute to minute, you're not thinking of philosophy. You're not thinking of Jewish law. You're not thinking of science and mathematics. When you come out and you're free, and you're living in a free country, you're living in Israel, then you can begin to discuss things. So what I'm saying to you here is, all of these rabbis, Takanat, who established Takanat ShUM, all of these great rabbis are writing as Rashi did. They're writing in placid times. So it's not all woe, it's not all catastrophe, it's not always a history of pogroms. So there are times, many, many times, in Jewish history where life is fairly calm, and that's when you get great Jewish productivity in terms of the rabbinical law, in terms of history, whatever it may be. So that happens, but then the bad times come. The bad times come at the very end of the 11th century, when Pope Urban is going to proclaim the necessity of Christians in Europe to wage war against the Muslims and regain the Holy Land for Christendom. This is the beginning of the Crusades. The Crusades were a horrendous time for the Jewish people, and particularly in the area that I'm talking about. This is an area in which itinerant priests are going to go around and say to people, remember, the Pope has said if you go on the crusade, you are freed from sin. These are the period of the indulgences. Go on the crusade and you are free from sin. But the only people who can go on the crusade, with some exceptions, are the knights, the fairly well-to-do people. What can be done for ordinary people, the peasants, working class people in the small towns and in the cities? And the argument is of itinerant priests, not of the papacy. No pope has ever called for the murder of Jews. Now, they call for restrictions on Jews. We'll talk about that in a moment. But no pope has ever called for, let us say, the murder of Jews. You can put them in ghettos, you can make them wear special clothing, but you can't kill them. Even St. Augustine, who really in some ways was very hostile to the Jews, says you cannot kill the Jews for a number of reasons. We don't have to get into this now, but he doesn't support it. But itinerant priests began to roam around the Rhineland, began to roam around the area, the ShUM cities, and began to say to people, we know that you cannot go, but one way you can gain freedom from sin and salvation is to slaughter the people who killed Jesus, kill the Jews. And although the term pogrom is not used, that's a Russian word describing what happened in the second half of the 19th century in Russia. Pogrom-like activities will really spread throughout this area. And these communities are going to be wiped out or being close to be wiped out. And it is in the rabbis of ShUM. Some of the rabbis are going to say, these Jews are under pressure to convert. That's one way that they can save their lives. Some of the rabbis are going to say, you are to die al Kiddush Hashem. You are to die for the sanctification of the holy name. And a number of Jews in the ShUM cities actually are killed. They will not convert. And some of them commit suicide. They burn, they hole up in their houses and they burn the houses to the ground rather than to be forced into conversion. The rabbis of the ShUM who do survive play a major role in rebuilding the ShUM cities and the Jewish communities. This is a very vivid testimony to the resilience of the Jewish people. Attacked, decimated, they are going to rebuild. So the Crusades are a very, very difficult time. And Jewish life begins to reconstitute in the aftermath of the Crusades. And then, of course, something that is probably the worst thing in terms of a catastrophe that has ever happened to Europe. And as a historian, I'm conscious of the impact of the two world wars upon Europe and upon European Jewry, and of course of diseases. The worst disease of them all that is estimated to have killed maybe more than a third of European Jewry, and somewhere between 25 and 50 million people all over the world. And again, decimating European society is the Black Plague, bubonic plague in 1327 and going on for quite some time. And here the problem is, of course, when there is catastrophe, this is what I drum into my students, and if you heard me before, I drum it into you. I've drummed it into you. And that is, in times of war and in times of catastrophe, there's a statement. I wish I had coined this statement, but I tell my students you can't plagiarize. I got to give credit to where credit is due. It is a senator from California, I believe, who, opposing Wilson's declaration of war against Germany in April of 1917, said, it's a good statement, and it's actually valid now as well. In war, the first casualty is the truth. In war, the first casualty is the truth. So lo and behold, the Jews, remember, who are considered to be Christ killers, are unliked because of their economic activity, dressing differently. What do you think is going to happen? A rumor spreads in the ShUM cities and in other parts of France. A rumor spreads that the Jews are poisoning the wells. No, people think that it's poisoning the wells, the water, that causes the bubonic plague. That's not true. That's the Black Death. Bubonic plague and the Black Death are one and the same. It's rodents, it's rats, and the failure to pick up the garbage, festering garbage, which brings the rats carry the disease. But that is not known at that period of time. And people look around, the desire for a scapegoat, it's there. And what's going to happen is Jews are killed by the thousands all over Western and Central Europe. But the rabbis reconstitute, again, testimony to Jewish resilience, and then the Jews are going to, again, prosper again, and then something else happens. Do you remember, for those of you that came on my East European trips, we go to the beautiful city of Prague, and we go to the main square. In the main square, there's a statue of a very impressive-looking man. This was Jan Hus, H-U-S. Hus is a proto-reformer in the Catholic Church. He was a priest in the Roman Catholic Church. He wants special reforms in the liturgy, ending the gluttony, ending the privileged economic position of the priests. He wants real reform. Luther is going to say almost the same thing 100 years later. But what's going to happen is Hus is invited for a great Catholic conference at Constance in Switzerland. He's promised immunity. When he gets there, he's burned at the stake. They betray him. The Catholic Church betrays one of their own. But the Hussite movement, the followers of Hus, are going to rise. And we see, of course, the Catholic Church coming out guns blazing or swords blazing against the Hussites. The Jesuits are in the front of this, and the attack upon the Hussites in Bohemia and Moravia is going to spread to the German lands and to the areas of the Rhine. So once again, the Jews are going to come under attack. But once again, the rabbis come, the rabbis reconstitute, and the Jewish communities begin to prosper again. And then, of course, we come to the Holocaust. This is the end for, at least for some time. Synagogues in the ShUM cities are burned to the ground during Kristallnacht, November 9th of 1938, and Jews will begin to be deported once the war begins. Not before the war, but once the war begins, the Jews are deported. Some go to Auschwitz. Most of them go to Theresienstadt. And you remember we went to Theresienstadt, the so-called model camp. Some are sent to Riga in Latvia. Nearly everyone who goes from the ShUM cities will die. And when we get to the ShUM cities, you're going to see something that the Germans in the post-war period have done, and it's a very nice thing that local communities have done. They've created the Stoppelsteine. These are bricks that are placed in the ground in front of houses where Jews lived, and the names of the people who were deported and the dates from which, the date on which they were deported are there. So people for, I can't say forever, nothing is forever, but Germans living in these areas who are now living in the houses and the apartments in which Jews live will now know that there was a Jewish community, and it will be personalized because they will actually know the names of these people and these families who lived there. I must tell you parenthetically, Germany, in contrast to Austria, the Germans have come clean on the Holocaust. There is no Holocaust denial in Germany. And when we get to Germany, and I will talk about it, because in a moment I'll talk to you about, I'll set this in some of the other things that I'm going to talk to you about. And that is, again, there's no Holocaust denial. There's a myth in Germany. And the myth is, and it's a fallacious one, it really is a myth. And that is, yes, we Germans accept the idea that Germany is responsible for the death of 6 million Jews. But it wasn't our gallant soldiers in the Wehrmacht. They didn't do anything. They had nothing to do with the murder of Jews. It was those bastards in the SS, those criminals, those Gauleiters, those Nazi party officials, and the Sturmabteilung. These are the people that killed the Jews, but not, of course, our gallant soldiers in the Wehrmacht. That is not worth a hill of beans. We'll talk about that. The Wehrmacht the German army played a very important role in murdering the Jews. But again, there's no Holocaust denial, and you will see memorials in the ShUM cities and in every city which we go to on this Rhine River cruise. You'll see memorials, again, to what happened during the Holocaust. The Austrians haven't come clean. The Japanese, who raped their way through China. You know what the slogan of the Japanese was in China? Burn all, kill all, loot all. Japan worries about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, has never accepted the guilt of what they did, really accepted the guilt of what they did in Southeast Asia and what they did in China. Germany has come clean on that. So, and what's going to happen afterwards is, of course, in the post-war period, a strange phenomenon took place in the cities, in the ShUM cities, in Berlin and throughout Germany itself. And that is Russian Jews, Soviet Jews. Remember in the late 80s and in the 90s, when there were waves of Jewish immigration, close to 1 million Jews went to Israel. But tens upon tens of thousands of Jews went to Germany. Now, why did they go to Germany? What can I say to you? Germany was a prosperous country. These people had suffered, some of them economically, within the Soviet Union. Anti-Semitism is illegal within Germany, but anti-Semitism, na ulica, it was illegal in the Soviet Union, but the expression na ulica in Russian, on the street, you could be called a Žid, a kaik, a Yid or a kaik. And there were quotas against the Jews and so on. Germany offered, particularly in Berlin, Germans, because West Berlin was isolated, it was in East Germany. The West German government wanted people to settle in Berlin, and they gave incentives to Jews. And they may even have given incentive to Jews to settle in Germany, a way of assuaging guilt and a way of, let us say, enhancing the German image. Be that as it may, when we get to the ShUM cities, you're going to see, and there are Jews, there are Jewish communities there. They're small, there are Jewish communities there, and large numbers of them are Russian Jews, Soviet Jews who settled in this area. So we're going to go to different places. We're going to start the cruise in Dusseldorf. Dusseldorf is important in Jewish history because one of the greatest literary figures in German history happened to have been a Jew. In fact, he is considered, along with Goethe, the greatest poet in German history. That is Heinrich Heine. And we'll talk about Heine when we get to Dusseldorf and the problems that Heine confronted in Dusseldorf because he was a Jew. It is Heine who, incidentally, is known for that famous quote. Now, German students to this day and students of European literature study Heine's poems. But Heine's very famous and prescient remark is, where they burn books, they will one day burn people. That is from a man in the first half of the 19th century. Maybe he understands the German culture or the German folk spirit better than anybody else. So, Heinrich Heine in Dusseldorf. We go to ShUM cities, Heinrich Heine in Dusseldorf. Then we'll go to Strasbourg. Strasbourg in Alsace. Alsace is very important in Jewish history. And in Strasbourg, you will see a church. Now, I'm not going to tell you now, and many of you, if you want to say it, you will see in Strasbourg in the front of the church something that you will see in Notre Dame, in front of the great church in Notre Dame. The tour guides never tell you about what's in front of these churches. But when we get there, and I took people to France, I told them about what was happening, what they saw in Notre Dame, and you'll see it in Strasbourg as well. So Strasbourg, a large Jewish community, will go to what in German is called Köln, what the French call Cologne. And that is an important city. Jewish life there, very important. Large Jewish community, fairly large down to the present day. And since we'll be talking about German history as well, a very important man was the mayor of Cologne, an anti-Nazi. Henry Kissinger, in his last book, written before he died, published before he died, talking about great leaders, talks about Konrad Adenauer, the Alte. For those of you who are old enough, This is the man that made sure that West Germany, what is today called the Bundesrepublik, what we used to call West Germany, that West Germany became a democratic country, and that West Germany was anchored in European democratic civilization, and anchored in the European Union, and anchored in NATO. This is one of the great personalities, and he was the mayor of Cologne and was an anti-Nazi. So we'll go to Cologne, we'll go to Dusseldorf, we'll go to Strasbourg, and then we will go to Basel. Basel is very, very important in Jewish history. Even if you have the most cursory knowledge of Jewish history, you know that in 1897, in the city of Basel, was held the first Zionist Congress. It is in Basel that an idea known as Zionism becomes a movement. How did an idea become a movement? And as I drum into my students, and for those who have heard me before, I tell you ad nauseum, never, never minimize the role of personality in history. How did Theodor Herzl take an idea that is not born with him, an idea that was said by others? Moses Hess said what Herzl said. Writes the book, Der Judenstaat, the Jew state. The book appears in the middle of the 1890s. But he doesn't say anything new about how the Europeans hate the Jews, they'll assimilate us, or they'll kill us, we got to get out, we got to have a land of our own. Moses Hess said the same thing in 1862. Dr. Pinsker in Odessa had said the same thing in 1881 in the midst of the pogroms, his book Auto-Emancipation. People picked up on it, not from Hess, but they picked on it from Pinsker. And in Russia, there was organizations called Hovevei Zion, the Lovers of Zion. But it's Herzl who takes an idea that the Jews have to leave Europe and have to have a land of their own. It's Herzl who turns the idea into a movement. It's Herzl who plays this role in convening the first Zionist Congress in 1897. And he is quite right. In one of the great prophecies of the late 19th century, it is Herzl who says, 50 years from today, there will be a Jewish state in Palestine. He's off by 6 months. 50 years from that is going to be 1947. It's in 1948 that the Jewish state is created. So we'll talk about the birth of Zionism and why. I must tell you, why is the first Zionist Congress in Basel? There's an interesting thing here. The Orthodox rabbis, I'll put it another way, Herzl wanted the first Zionist Congress to be held in either Munich or Berlin. Germany was a great center of Jewish life, large Jewish community. I must tell you, we'll talk about that. Reform Judaism, conservative Judaism, and modern Orthodoxy are all born in Germany in the 19th century. The Haskalah, the fact that you and I, nearly all of us, don't wear yarmulkes, that we don't wear traditional Jewish clothing, that we study secular subjects. That's all from Germany, and that's all we're going to talk about that. So even the Orthodox rabbis say, no, we are German Jews. We are German Jews. Germany is our nationality. Germany is our ethnicity. Our religion is Jewish. We are Germans of the Mosaic persuasion, and you, Herzl, are going to raise the issue of dual loyalty. We can't allow it. That's why the first Zionist Congress is held in Basel. We'll talk about that when we get to Basel, and you'll go to the place where the first Zionist Congress was. And again, I must tell you, there's nothing like being in a place. For those of you that come with me, all these Jewish history tours that I've led, whether it's in St. Petersburg, or it's in Kiev, or it's in Odessa, or it's in Vienna, Krakow, Warsaw, wherever we go, when you stand in a place, close your eyes, and then you can get a sense of history. And that's what we're going to do in Basel. That's what we're going to do in all of these places. So all of this is going to be set against the background of German history in the modern period. I'll talk to you about this on the boat. I'll talk to you about it on land. How does Bismarck unite the German states in the 1860s? Why is he considered to be a diplomatic genius? What does he do for German history? How did the Jews fare under Bismarck in a unified German state? What's the mistake that that German state makes? What's the mistake that many German Jews make by adhering and swearing allegiance to that? What does World War I do for Germany? What's the impact of World War I upon Jewish life? And then we come to the interwar period, a prosperous time, the time known as Weimar Germany. What happens to the Jews there? How did the Nazis come to power? In the elections of 1928, the Nazi Party received 800,000 votes out of 20 million cast, less than 5% of the vote. 1930, they get 6.5 million votes. 1932, they get 13,187,000 votes, 37.6% of the vote, a clear plurality. How did it happen? How did Hitler come to power? How did German Jews respond in the ShUM cities and elsewhere? And then, what about now? Here, this incredible irony of history. We'll talk about that on the cruise as well. Who is Israel's second most reliable ally? It's Germany. Germany, that killed 6 million people in the Holocaust, turns out to build the Israeli Navy. Israeli submarines, in many cases, are built in Germany. The equivalent of what we used to call PT boats, patrol torpedo boats, that really protect the coast of Israel. They're all built in Germany. The second arms plant, now the Germans under pressure from within, and because of what is happening in Gaza, the Germans are cutting off some of their supplies. But up until recently, Germany was Israel's second most reliable ally, and the only country that provided Israel, of course Israel paid for them, provided Israel with the weapons of self-defense. How did this happen? And what about the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland? This is a right-wing party with more than a modicum of anti-Semitism, and it is polling increasingly well in Germany. Is it a threat to German democracy? Is it a threat to the Jews of Germany? Well, that's something that we can talk about. We will hear from Germans who will tell us about what's happening there. And once again, it's one thing to read something in the newspapers, it's another thing to see it in the flesh. That's what we're going to do. I like to think, and I do believe, an Ayelet trip is a very, very good trip. I say this modestly, it may not come out modestly. A Berk trip, I think, is a special trip. We don't leave people alone. We make sure everybody is together. And I just love the contact with you that I will have. And all the questions that you ask, to the best of my ability, I will answer. You'll get a reading list talking about German Jewry. The best book, one volume account, I think, is Amos Elan, E-L-O-N, Amos Elan's book, The Pity of It All, which is a very good account of German Jewish history. So, my friends, I have, for want of a better cliche, I've shot my load. And so, the floor is yours. I'll take any questions that you have. Jeffrey, let's get to it.
Professor Berk, as always, thank you for taking us through not just the history of the ShUM region, but really a broader history of Germany, the region, and a little bit of a tasting of what we have to come on the cruise. I'm just going to share my screen for a minute. Of course, everybody, I'll remind you, if you'd like to ask any questions, we already have them coming in. You please use the Q&A function, and we will get to those in a moment. But this is, I suppose, your commercial break for a moment. We, of course, have been talking about the cruise, as it says there, from ShUM to statehood, referencing Basel as the location for the First Zionist Congress. By the way, I just want people to understand the dates that are listed here, June 15th through 22nd. That is the cruise. It's a one-week cruise. As I said, luxury yacht, private. We own the ship for that week. but there are also options pre and post. So there are options to go to Hamburg with Dr. David Mendelson. He happens to live in Israel, but he actually has a farm in Hamburg. So in addition to the Jewish history element of it, you'll get interaction with the local Jewish community and get to hear from him as somebody who spends a good amount of his time living in and around Hamburg. From there, we also have another pre-trip to Berlin. And for those of you that just can't get enough, there's so much to see and do. There is a post tour that continues from Basel to Paris. So lots on offer. As I mentioned, it's an absolutely beautiful ship. There's a spa on board. All of the meals are included. There's just a lot happening. And as it says there, there is a early bird special. Excuse me, that's going on through October 6th. So if you are interested, now is the time. We've already sold a good number of cabins. So particularly if you want to choose a cabin, now is a good time to get on this. The other things we have coming up, of course, always lots and lots of stuff happening here. We did send an email out today. We have a program that will be starting with Ralph Nurnberger, 4-part virtual series after the Chagim. So end of October into November, 4-part series called Fact, Fiction, and Fallout. Ralph did a wonderful program for us back in the spring, and really looking forward to this. I know he's been putting these together and very interesting topics. He goes really, really deep in depth into each topic, and we'll look forward. Hopefully you'll join us for that. All of the information about this and so much more can be found on our website, ayelet.com. Lots of trips coming up, lots of amazing things. I hope you will check it all out, and we look forward to seeing you both virtually and in human form. All of that.
And Jeffrey, we have a series coming up on Iran.
Oh my goodness, yes, I suppose that's the reveal. Professor Berk will be in January doing a 4-part virtual program on Iran. Not just what's happening today. This is not a current events series. We're going to be going back to the time of Cyrus, talking about the Persian Empire, 2,500 years.
Cyrus to the Ayatollahs.
From Cyrus to the Ayatollahs. There you have it.
All.
So keep an eye on your email. Information about that will be coming relatively soon. We got a few things between now and then. Okay, let's get to the questions. We got lots of things already coming in here. Some of them going way, way back in history. Oh, wonderful. I cannot believe this is a perfect first question from Susan and Stephen. What does ShUM mean? We never clarified. What is ShUM?
These are the Hebrew names of the cities. They're different. Worms has a Hebrew name. I would not pronounce it correctly. That's where it comes from. The M, of course, is Mainz. But Worms and Speyer, that's where it comes from. It's a Hebrew acronym.
It's an acronym.
It's a Hebrew acronym. That's exactly what it is.
My question for you, Professor Berk, is that a modern day acronym, or if we went back to the time of Rashi and we said, hey, I heard you're living in the ShUM cities?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure Rashi would do it because Rashi is fairly early. But by the time you get to the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries, in fact, you may remember in the talk, I made reference to Takanat ShUM. That's how the rabbis at that time referred to their ordinances. Takanat ShUM.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. My goodness, we have so many questions coming in. Let's stick with ShUM for one more here. An anonymous question came in. How did the Jews of the ShUM region react to the changing of the rules that you were talking about at the beginning, such as ending polygamy and the thing about a widow marrying their brother-in-law? Were these immediately accepted, or is this something that took a long time to kind of be adopted?
We don't know. Every time I participate in these programs, the questions, this is the group of people. Union is a very good school, but the kids are kids, and these are real people. So the question is a good one. We really don't know how much polygamy was practiced before. We don't know. It must have been practiced because there wouldn't have been a ruling like this. We don't know about much opposition to it. We just don't know. And we also don't know, again, maybe a rabbi steeped in the knowledge of the ShUM cities, the rabbinic, the halachot of the ShUM cities, would know if there was a grandfather clause here, that in the future you could not marry But if you were married to more than one woman, could you still be married to that woman? The honest answer is I don't know. I do know that there doesn't seem to be in the rabbinical literature, at least what I've perused, that there's not much opposition to it, which may mean polygamy was not widespread at this period of time. And then the chalitza, that there is some controversy about that, but because it is the right thing to do, to force another man to marry a woman that he may have no attachment to and so on, that was accepted. There was controversy, but that was accepted. Chalitza is better than the other alternative.
So just to stay on the polygamy for a second, Alan Lisowitz wrote in asking how and when did the Jewish custom of multiple wives begin? I think this goes back to that's a
biblical thing. And
yeah.
you know, on one hand, it is it looks bad for women, right? You know, on a priori, that looks bad for women. On the other hand, polygamy provides some protection for women. Men died, men were dying. And to be a widow in those times, very difficult, so that another man could take her on, even though he was married, provides some protection for the women. It does, again, there were some things, Jeffrey, and I'm the first to concede this. I know my limitations here. There are some things in history and in religion and politics that are more within the realm of the psychoanalyst than they are of the political scientist or the historian. What the impact of women is in a polygamous relationship, I'm not prepared to discuss. But you can make a case that it does provide some protection for women.
Okay. Let's stick with the ShUM cities for just a couple more questions here. Don't know if you'll know the answer. Was there a council of rabbis among the ShUM cities? Was there a chief rabbi that led the lawmaking from ShUM?
There are councils. There are synods. There are councils, a number of them. They begin in Troyes. Rashi is involved in one of them, and then they pass into the ShUM cities. There are a number of them. There are councils of rabbis, and when there is an outstanding rabbi, like Rabbi Tom, you wouldn't call him the chief rabbi, but he's understood to be the main rabbi there.
Okay. From Richard and Barbara Hirsch, we're looking forward to the cruise. Dr. Berk, it would be nice if you could talk a little bit more about if there were any things that kind of differentiated worms versus minds versus spire. If there were things that were beyond them all being grouped together as kind of this center, if there were things that kind of differentiated.
Again, one has, I don't want to mix this up. One has the oldest cemetery, another has the oldest mikveh, and Worms has the great yeshiva. Now, what I did not mention in the talk, to show you how important Worms is even at a later period of time, it is so important that people who came from Worms take Worms as their last name. So in France, for example, there's an Abraham, there's an Asher, his name is Asher Worms, at the end of the 18th century, and he's got a son, Abraham Worms. What is important, this is really to show you how Jews are adapting. In France, in 1791, I think it's September 21st, in September of 1791, a man gets up, not a non-Jew, in the French Parliament, gets up and says, to the Jews as a people, nothing. To the Jews as Frenchmen, everything. Meaning, you got to assimilate. You forget this idea of going back to Palestine. Forget this idea that you are a unique people. Give it all up. Not give it all up. Adhere to your religion. But it's French law and not Talmudic law. French is your language, not Yiddish or Hebrew. And you got to join with us. You are citizens. And so what does Abraham Asher do? Excuse me, Asher, again, last name Worms, which means he is the family's from Worms. He's influenced by Worms. And what does he do? He enrolls, he shaves his beard. He's an Orthodox rabbi. He shaves his beard so he can join the National Guard. And then he takes his son out of the yeshiva. and trains him to, I think, work on the land or something like that, because the argument is that even at that time, later on be a more common argument, Jews have to stop money lending, stop commerce and trade, work with your hands. This is, again, an example of adaptability, and it may be in one way or another, you can trace it to Worms. After all, their last name was Worms.
Okay. We're going to go a couple other good questions about the origin of the ShUM community. So Brad Gornstein writes in, how and when did the ShUM communities originate? Were they composed of Jews scattered throughout the Roman Empire after the destruction of the Second Temple, or was there some other way?
We believe that there were Jews living in the first centuries of the Common Era as part of the Roman Empire. We're not sure we have any evidence of that. We believe that the community begins somewhere in the 10th century. And it comes from Jews moving from, we are a wandering people, Jeffrey. That's why we have Ayelet cruises and Ayelet trips. Jews like to travel. And they move, yes, they move after the destruction of the temple. They move, some of them probably moved as a consequence of the Arab conquests of North Africa. And they cross the straits of Gibraltar, and they move into Western Europe. That's probably where they come from. We don't think that the Jewish communities outlasted the Roman Empire. We think they disappear, and then these new migrants come in and form the communities.
Okay. I'm going to go back in history a little further. An anonymous question. You told the story of the Gospel of Matthew. Is there a historic counter story? From what you said, it's understandable that Jews are blamed for the crucifixion of Jesus. And what was the reason for the Jews to demand crucifixion?
We don't, but this is a very good question, and I will try to finish it before Shavuos. All right? Now, the issue is going to be the Judaism of today is not the Judaism of yesteryear. Today, if you go to an Orthodox rabbi and you say you want to convert to Judaism, he will tell you to go away. You come back a second time, he'll tell you to go away. Come back a third time, he'll say, let that sit down and study. Jews are not at this period of time a proselytizing people and have not been so for centuries, largely because of a fear of what the Christian reaction would be. In the period of Jesus, the Jews were a proselytizing people and very, very successful. One estimate by Salo Baron, it's probably too high, is that 1/3 of the people living in the Roman Empire were either Jews or God-fearers. These were people who did not convert to Judaism, but they hung around the synagogue and participated in some parts of Jewish life and obeyed some of the Jewish laws. The Christians and the Jews are competing with each other for converts. And the ultimate aim of the new Christian church is to Christianize the Roman Empire, particularly the emperors, the leaders. If you want to convert Rome to Christianity, you don't blame the Romans for the crucifixion of Jesus. You got to find somebody else. And the answer is the Jews.
Seems to be a recurring theme for a lot of these time periods.
Now, what I didn't say, but I will say it on the cruise, but I've said it to many of you before. Believe it or not, this goes beyond the question, but I'll get back to the question. Believe it or not, there's an intellectual coherence to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism explains multi-causal phenomena in a monocausal way. I'll say it again. Anti-Semitism explains multi-causal phenomena in a monocausal way. Why, in fact, did we lose the war? The Jews stabbed us in the back. In the United States, Reverend Farrakhan and some of his followers, why is there, let's say, narcotics? Why is there, let's say, venereal disease, whatever it may, why is there AIDS in the African-American community? There are many reasons for that. The Jews are doing it. Jewish doctors are doing it. Jews are responsible for slavery. All of these things. And so a desire in this period of time to explain all the problems, blame it on the Jews. So you get the basic teachings of contempt, Uh, and that's going to lead to all sorts of problems. Now, if you want to go back to the question again.
You wanna hear the question again? So
Yeah, let me
it
hear the
was
question again. So
it
maybe I
was
can.
specifically from what you said. It's understandable that Jews are blamed for the crucifixion of
Yeah.
Jesus. What was the reason for the Jews to demand crucifixion? And is there
All
a
right.
counter story to the
It's
gospel?
but that's the story, and the story is written in that way in order to win the competition. Also, you got to be fair here. The first Christians are Jewish or Hebrew Christians. The difference, they observe Shabbat, they observe kashrut, they put on tefillin. They are Jews, except they accept Jesus as the Messiah, and they accept Jesus, some of them, as the Son of God. They will be persecuted by the Jewish majority within Judea. And there is a great deal of hostility on the part of the new Christians towards the Jews because of the persecution that they're experiencing. So these two things, one, a desire to win the competition between Jews and Christians for converts, and then the bitterness on the part of some new Christians because of the persecution that they're receiving at the hands of the Jews. Now, whether the Jews really demanded the crucifixion of Jesus, all I can tell you is, finally, after 2,000 years, at Vatican II, the Catholic Church changed its position. The Church said in Vatican II, the Jews are not responsible for the death of Jesus. The Romans are responsible. If there was any Jewish culpability, it was from a small number of Jews. And the Jews of that time should not be blamed for the crucifixion of Jesus, and the Jews down to the present day until the end of time, the Jews should not be blamed for the crucifixion of Jesus.
All right, we got lots of questions still to go here.
Go ahead.
Interesting.
I'm
Here
here.
we go. Here we go. David Goldstein would like to know, this is an interesting one. Could you talk about the origin of Ashkenazi Jews from a limited number of women in Germany? I assume he's referring to something specific that maybe you are familiar with.
I'm not familiar with that. The origins of Ashkenazi Jewry are in the German lands, that's for sure. Whether there was an abundance of women over men, I confess, I don't know if that's true.
It
I know
sounds like
all,
he's saying genetically you can trace Ashkenazi lineage back to just a very few, like a small handful of women in the region. But
yeah,
we'll have to do a little research and we can talk about it on the
right,
on the.
right. That incidentally, I don't know if this is David Goldstein. I know David Goldstein is a good friend, is a retired cardiologist in Rochester. I don't know if that's coming from him, but this not only do tracing at the beginnings of Ashkenazi Jewry, but tracing some of the genetic diseases that afflict the Jewish people, like Tay-Sachs and other things. They are also traced back to a small number of people living in Lithuania. Beyond that, I'm not going, Jeffrey.
All right, we'll move right along. Okay, we got a few current event questions, but before we get there, Barbara Silverstein asks, and I mean, you could do a whole history class on this, but why did Prussia, or how did Prussia change its name to Germany, and when did this happen?
This is going to happen in the aftermath of Bismarck's wars. The first wars with Denmark in 1864 to get the Danish provinces of Schleswig and Holstein, which had a large number of Germans living in them. The second war is against Austria, 1866, and that really is going to unite all of the northern part of Germany, and then the war against France. So what Prussia is going to do is gather all of these German cities around them, and you can't call it Prussia anymore. You got to call it Germany. It's Deutschland. To show you how history changes, and you got to be careful. The first real attempt to unify the German states is in 1848. And in 1848, a song is created. Most people associate that song with the Nazis, because the Nazis became the Nazi national anthem. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. Deutschland over all. And at that time, Deutschland, Germany over everything, absolutely everything. Your loyalty should be to Germany. When it is coined in 1848, the year of revolution, when some German liberals and nationalists tried to create a unified Germany, Deutschland über alles means one Germany over all of the independent German states. So
Meanings
that's what they're
change.
first talking about it in 1848 and then in 1871. And so people out there will get their money's worth. Where is Deutschland, a unified German state, created? I'll leave you with this. We'll talk about it more on the cruise. You know where Kaiser Wilhelm I is called the Kaiser of Deutschland? In the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles.
Okay. All
and
right.
that is important because that's a humiliation for France. That will leave an indelible imprint. Well, I'll tell you something else. I'll tell you. You know where the Treaty of Versailles is signed? Where the Allies sock it to the Germans? In the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, which we went to on a number of Ayelet trips.
Okay. All right. A few more. We're going to start to wrap up here. Some great historical questions. How many Jews lived in Germany at the peak?
At the peak, probably 525,000 Jews. That's before the Nazis come to that. Actually, that is when the Nazis, at the time the Nazis come to power, there are probably 525, around that, 525,000 Jews who are associated in one way or another with the Jewish community or easily identified as Jews. What's going to get sticky under the Nazis is, according to the Nuremberg laws, the Nazis were well aware of the fact 520,000, 25,000 Jews that are associated one way or another or identify as Jews. In addition to that, there were another 3 or 4 million Germans who had Jewish skeletons in the closet. So, for example, there were lots and lots of people who were Christians, whose parents were Christians, but who had a Jewish grandparent. And according to the Nuremberg racial laws, the initial law is, if you're a Christian and your parents are Christian and you have one Jewish grandparent, you're a Jew. But because so many millions of Germans had Jewish skeletons in the closet, including some leading Nazis, including people in the Air Force and in the Army, the Nazis made a distinction. If you had you were Christian, mother and father were Christian, and you had that one Jewish or 2 Jewish skeletons in the closet, two Jewish grandparents, you were what is called a Mischlinger, someone of mixed blood. If you were a Christian and your parents were Christian and you had 3 Jewish grandparents, you were a Jew. That's the difference in the Third Reich between life and death. Because Mischlingen, by and large, were not deported.
All right. One more, then we'll go to a few current event things. When reform arises in Germany in the 19th century, does it manifest in the ShUM cities as well, or is that limited to the larger urban areas?
I think by the end of the end, remember, these communities are very small. I think there were some what would be called, in Germany, they weren't called reform, they're called liberal. And I think there may have been some small liberal congregations there as well.
Okay. A couple of people asking questions about the cruise. How many people on this tour? It will be somewhere around similar to what we had in Eastern Europe over the summer, around 100 people. Very manageable group. Obviously, when we leave the boat, breaking into separate buses, we've got an amazing team of people that will be on the ground, including local guides, tour directors, or escorts, and of course scholars, including Professor Berk.
Tell them, Jeffrey, they will be well taken care of, as they always are on an Ayelet trip. Especially, we had a wonderful trip to Eastern Europe. If you didn't go, really, you missed a very, 4 buses we had, and Ayelet handled it superbly. I must say, thank Jeffrey and Daron. Well done.
It was a beautiful trip. Absolutely. I have a lovely note here from Myra Durkach, who writes in. She's got a solution. She said, we're outnumbered, but she has a solution: reinstate bigamy and have more Jewish children. So Myra, thanks for giving us a little levity at the end of the program. Professor Berk, as always, it is an absolute pleasure. I will join you in wishing everybody Gmar Chatima Tova. If you're fasting, may it be an easy fast. And as always, we're praying for good, peaceful times ahead, and personally health for all of you out there. If people have questions about the cruise or other trips, of course, contact our office, ayelet.com. Thank you all for participating in this Scholar-Palooza series. Professor Berk, as always, thank you for your
Thank
insight.
you, Jeffrey. And again, as I always end, Shalom Uvracha. Peace and a blessing to all of you. Thank you for listening. Hope to see you on the cruise. A meaningful fast for all of you. And above all, a happy and healthy new year. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.